Imagine you're going on a trip to Scotland. Where would you like to go? And what would you like to see? Well, I imagine you would immediately think of going to visit some of the beautiful castles that you've read about or seen on TV, like Edinburgh or Stirling castles. But today I'd like to tell you about the beauty and rich history of some of Scotland's lesser-known castles. I was born in Scotland, and that's where all my family is from. We came to America when I was a toddler, but I've gone back to visit several times. My mom has lots of books on the history of Scotland, and I have grown up hearing all the stories and legends. Did you know that Scotland's first castles were built by the Normans? According to the book Castles by Blanchett, Somerset, and Fry, they were invited to do so by the Scottish kings, and later on by the Scots themselves. The most outstanding feature of the Scottish castles is the majestic tower. It's what immediately catches one's eye and what makes the castle so appealing. Although one is at first drawn to the majestic towers and fantastic architecture of the Scottish castles, along with the rolling hills and misty lochs surrounding them, the true fascination comes from the history and mystery surrounding the builders and inhabitants that chose to live behind the fortified walls of these beautiful but lesser-known castles. The three castles that I'm going to tell you about today are Castle Campbell, which was originally called the Castle of Bloom, the Glendalough Castle, where the foundations built during the day were mysteriously destroyed every night, and Dunvegan Castle, home of the fairy tower and fairy flag. Let's start by looking at Castle Campbell. I picked this castle for many reasons, one of which is that I'm from the clan of Campbell on my mother's side. The Campbells come originally from Scotland, which is in the northern region of Great Britain. The exact time period in which this castle was built is not known, but the earliest remaining structure dates back to the late 15th century. This great tower is in excellent condition, and it stands about 60 feet high. The tower has 4 stories. 3 of them have elegant vaulted ceilings, and there is a pit prison built into the basement. The original name of the castle was the Castle of Bloom. And in the year 1465, it was passed down through marriage to Colin Campbell, who was the first Earl of Argyll. Apparently the name of the castle was a bit gloomy for the first Earl, because in 1489, he had it changed to Castle Campbell by an Act of Parliament. According to the book Exploring Britain's Castles by editor Donna Wood, during the English Civil War, the Earl of Argyll sided firmly with Oliver Cromwell's parliamentary forces. Because of that loyalty, in 1654, Castle Campbell was burned down by the Royalists, and in 1661, the Earl was executed. Only the splendid tower and east wing remained intact and were used by the family until the early 19th century. In 1948, the castle was given over to Historic Scotland and is now partially open to the public. If you do decide to venture there, the trek up the Glen from Dollar is rough, but very worthwhile. Now let's look at Glendalough Castle. With the Avon and Spey rivers flowing through the grounds, Glendalough Castle is one of the most beautiful and mysterious castles of Scotland. The Macpherson Grants have owned and occupied the castle since 1546, and this is one of the few castles which have been lived in continuously by the original family. The most famous story about this castle is in regards to its construction. It was originally designed to be built in a better defensive location up on a hill to the south. The workers would construct the foundation during the day, but every night an unseen hand would destroy the day's work, and they'd have to start all over the next morning. One night the Laird of Glendalough had had enough, so he went out to see what was happening to his foundation every night. He was standing there waiting when he heard a voice seeming to come out of the night sky, telling him to build it in the kuhau, and he would have no further problems. Well, a kuhau is just a cow marsh. It's a cow meadow in a rather marshy spot. But he realized that a marsh could be just as effective defensively as up on the hill. So he followed the voice's advice and built it there where it stands to this day. The ruins of the first site are still visible, and if you get a chance to visit this intriguing castle, be sure to be on the lookout for the ghost of General Grant, who is seen to be riding a magnificent horse, and who appears to be looking after his former castle. Lastly, I'd like to talk about Dunvegan Castle. This castle has always been the home and the stronghold of the chief of the MacLeod clan. It's one of the largest clans in the Highlands of Scotland. This castle is thought to go all the way back to the 13th century, when Laud, son of King Olaf the Black of the Isle of Man in North Isles, inherited part of Scotland and built a massive curtain wall around the rocky prominence overlooking the sea with only a small sea gate through which supplies could be brought through during times of siege. Laud died in 1280, but the castle has remained home to the MacLeods, which, according to the book Exploring Britain's Castles, only means son of Laud. The fairy tower was thought to have been built about 1500, and one of the family's most valued possessions is the fairy flag. There are many local legends about how the flag came into the possession of the MacLeods, but they all have a central theme involving a fairy maiden falling in love with the MacLeod and gifting them with a magical banner which can only be used 3 times and only in dire emergencies. Now, some stories have the fairy maiden being betrothed to one of the chiefs and it ending rather badly, and others have the fairy maiden singing to the infant son of one of the chiefs and wrapping him in the flag. But whichever version you hear, all of them have a warning of how not to use the flag, or famine and death will come upon the castle and all of its lands. Well, of course the warning was ignored, and they had to use one of the wavings to end the curse. Legend says that it's only been used twice, and there is still magic left in it for a final waving. Per the Dunvegan Castle website, though tattered and frail, with the crosses no longer visible, only the elf spots can be seen. The flag remains on display at the castle. The flag and the Dunvegan cup, which is filled with a claret that each of the chiefs is expected to drink completely upon assuming the title of chief, are 2 items definitely worth seeing when visiting this castle. I hope you enjoyed this brief tour of a few of Scotland's lesser-known castles: Castle Campbell, Ballindeloch, and Dunvegan. I hope you see that there is more to Scotland with its long and colorful history, rich stories and folklore, and of course, magnificent castles than you may have heard of before. I also hope I have whetted your appetite for further exploration. Travel to highlands and the boggy marshes. Take boat rides across the misty lochs and have long, fascinating conversations with the local inhabitants. Let yourself become immersed in the amazing history and hidden mysteries that surround these beautiful, but lesser-known castles of Scotland.